Loads of players linked from Italy to the Premier League. So our weekly slot with Nicky Bandini and Mina Rzouki is right now on Transfer Talk. Hello to both of you. Always good to see you. We're going to start, Mina, with Chelsea. We're told they've been encouraged to go back in for Rafael Leao. What can you tell us about him and how key is he to AC Milan?
You see, this really surprises me because by far he is, actually that's pretty harsh to say by far, but he is certainly for me their star. And if I'm watching Milan, then I'm looking out for Rafael Leao. He is a traditional winger. He is brilliant at dribbles. He won Best Serie A Player of the Year last year. He is just full of acceleration and pace and dribbling and ability and an eye for a goal. And he does all of it with this sort of nice grin on his face that makes you really entertained when you're watching him. Again, when I look at that team, there are a lot of great players from the midfield. Obviously, we spoke, Frank Kessie moved to Barcelona. They have Benacer, who was amazing over the weekend, Brahim Diaz. But Leao's the star. So for them to give him up at this stage of the transfer market, to me, seems very bizarre. And I think that unless you're paying something well over the odds, it basically is Milan saying to themselves, well, we're going to have to accept a hit this season.
Were either of you surprised that no one came in for Benacer in this window?
I think Benacer's always wanted, but he is somebody who doesn't seem to ever really put himself out there as in, you know, come and get me. He seems very happy where he is. And I think with the kind of education that he's getting from Stefano Pioli, who is a coach that works very closely with the players, he contacts them every day, talks to them about their talents and that. I think he feels that it's the right stage. So obviously, you know when players want to move in the way that they decide on their agents and what they're doing. But Benacer, for me, is one of the best midfielders in the world. And I do think, and he won I think at the time with the Africa Cup of Nations, best player. So I do think that eventually he will move on. But hopefully it's not for a while yet and we get to enjoy him.
Yeah, I do want to pick up on Leao because this is obviously would be a huge transfer if it happens. Probably the single most important attacking player on the Milan team that won the league last season and part of this sort of young group. There's no question that Milan would like to keep him. The issue is that he's got a contract till 2024, and so this is that sort of classic scenario that lots of clubs find themselves in where he hasn't renewed, and so this is probably your last chance to sell him at the peak of his value. You could sell him next summer and you'd get something for him for certain, but this is the chance to do it. He's got a release clause at 150 million euros. I don't think Chelsea are going to go to that. The question is whether or not Chelsea might be able to hit a point at which Milan are willing to deal. And what's being talked about in Italy is, well, maybe this can work for Milan if they could get, say, Ziyech and Pulisic to come in the opposite direction, a couple of other attacking players who could fill that gap. Because realistically, if you're Milan, you can't replace an attacking talent this late in the transfer window, even if you've got 100 million euros burning in your pocket, because then every other club knows you've got 100 million euros burning in your pocket.
And it's just also that combination he has with Theo Hernandez, you know, that it would be a shame to lose him.
Well, he's not the only person from Serie A linked with Chelsea, and there's also players linked going the other way.
Yes, well, I mean, I've just mentioned Ziyech and Pulisic, both of whom I think are sort of in the on the market, I would say, from Chelsea, and players who have had some inquiries from Italian clubs at different times. Dumfries is an interesting case because he's been so important already this season to Inter, and I think a reminder with Lukaku coming back of how much Lukaku thrives when he's got someone to provide him those crosses from the wings. And it was Hakimi before when he was at Inter, and then in the meantime, Inter have had Perisic, who's now gone to Tottenham. So losing Dumfries would be a big sort of sale for Inter, and again, I'd be surprised if they want to countenance it this late in the transfer window. But I'm not sure if there was someone other than Ziyech and Pulisic who you were thinking of.
Kepa.
Kepa, of course.
I think Napoli. And Ampadu. Yeah. So Ampadu obviously was on loan last year at Venezia, and I thought he had a very good season. But the clubs he's linked with are not perhaps clubs that will do anything other than try to fight off relegation this season as well, in Empoli and Spezia. So not two clubs that I'd be dying to join any time yet. But Empoli do have the same coach that he had at Venezia.
Well, he just wants to play games. He's got the World Cup coming up, and I think
he wants to get minutes. Yeah, and Zanetti knows him obviously from Venezia. But Kepa's an interesting one because actually Napoli have had a really tremendous end to this transfer market and brought in, Tanguy Ndombele and Raspadori, who's an Italian international, and now they were going to go after Keylor Navas, who suffered an injury. And they're thinking, okay, this is bad timing. Maybe it's time to look at Kepa because Chelsea would be willing to pay half his salary. And they are looking for a goalkeeper. And of course, he is looking to just be a consistent starter Will Napoli offer him that? I don't know.
There's no doubt he's a good goalkeeper, Kepa. It's just Mendy has been so good ahead of him
so good.
at Chelsea. As for Manchester United, they're showing interest in the Napoli fullback Eliaf Elmas, but one player that isn't coming to Old Trafford, we've talked about him a lot this window, is Rabiot.
Yeah, and Elmas, just to mention quickly, I feel like probably might be happy to get out of Italy, because I think unfortunately there has been a little bit of his team, North Macedonia, knocking Italy out of the World Cup. I think unfortunately has damaged his star a little bit in Italy, which is not very fair, even though I think he missed that game, didn't he? So, sorry, you were asking about...
It was about, and then the fact that Rabiot is off, because we've talked about him a lot in the last few weeks, haven't
Rabiot
we?
isn't off, which is such a sort of a frustrating moment for Juventus. It's been back and forth with Rabiot. I think Juventus were quite keen to move on and to take their midfield.
Not the coach. Allegri seems to really love Adrian Rabiot and actually came out and said, I've always thought that he's a Juventus-level player and I'm happy that he's here and he will start tomorrow's match. And this was in his pre-match conference. And of course he did, because Allegri seems to love him over every other player.
So he played last night.
Yes.
If it was a player here, there would be all the talk about how do we reintegrate this player, you know, if it was his mind elsewhere, can we throw him straight back in? But Allegri's gone, on you go. You're starting.
I think his mind's always been elsewhere, so that wouldn't have been that hard anyway. I joke, of course. One of the things is that Rabiot never felt unwanted by his coach, and he really does enjoy being at Juventus. So it wasn't a case of he was about to go somewhere like perhaps, you know, a Manchester City, a Liverpool, where he felt he was going to really fight for Champions. The whole point was that he asked for a lot in salaries because he wouldn't be playing in the Champions League. So for him, this was a move that would happen if it satisfied him financially, but otherwise he was more than happy where he was. He wants to play in the World Cup. He knows that he will get minutes, and he knows that he has a fan in Allegri, so the coach. This is very disturbing to a lot of the Juventus fans, obviously, because he takes minutes away from perhaps youngsters who are better on the ball and show a lot more promise. Having said that, he did score a goal, albeit offside, but you know, it's always good when he is part of the process.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that one counts as a positive there. I mean, we've got a few more to rattle through here, because tell us about Christian Kouame of Fiorentina, because Gianluca Di Marzio is saying that he's attracting interest from Brighton. How would he fare in the Premier League?
It's so hard to say when it comes to how someone's going to fare in the Premier League. He's got some traits that are interesting. He's fast. He's very quick off the mark. He did have a cruciate injury a couple of years ago.
That's what worries me.
But he seems to be back from that. He's been on loan last season at Anderlecht and playing in Belgium, where he did okay. I think one of the things that has always bugged me a bit with Kouame is he's one of those players who plays up front. I mean, he's playing on the right of attack since he got back to Fiorentina, but he has played through the middle as well. And just doesn't score that many goals. So he's sort of physically and technically quite talented. I think in some ways almost the best comparison I have in my head, and I'm not saying he's necessarily even at that level, is a sort of Alvaro Morata type who can stretch the field for you, who can bring you that sort of that ability to extend the pitch and to work on the counter, but he hasn't got ruthlessness in his game, I don't think.
I like Morata.
If we go back to June, I remember getting a phone call asking me to inquire about what was going on with Japhet Tanganga going from Tottenham to AC Milan, but it's now August the 23rd and he still hasn't gone. Is there any movement there?
Well, it's interesting how some of these transfers come around, because actually you could say the same about Leao. Leao conversations have been happening since July, and Milan in the meantime been trying to extend his contract. I think Tanganga is one of those options that has been on Milan's sort of, I guess, their big board of options, and the closer we get to the end of the transfer window, with them still not having got that extra centre-back, the more those options are going to come into play. They definitely have an interest, there's definitely conversations happening. I think this late in the transfer window, sometimes people underestimate how many conversations are happening.
Yeah.
So it's possible that there's someone else as well, but Milan are definitely considering him as a possible additional centre.
Also, it's 25 million potentially. It's quite a lot of money. So for Milan, and they made it very obvious at the start that they had priorities in De Ketelaere and in Renato Sanchez. Sanchez didn't work out, and so for them it was like everything else would be dealt with towards the end of the transfer market. And now I feel like that would also be pushed aside if interest in Leao is serious. And again, probably Tanganga would still be sitting there waiting to see what happens. But I certainly think they do need a player like him.
Well, someone who Roma really needed was Gini Wijnaldum. They got him, but now he's out for 3 months. How much of a blow is that to Roma, but also for the player with the World Cup coming up?
Yeah, Yeah, it's devastating, isn't it? And you think it is one thing for Roma. Do you know, it's funny that it happens with Roma, just because I remember during the Euros, Mourinho talking about injuries to players in the Euros, going, oh, sure, it's bad for that country, but it's worse for me when I go back to Rome and I've got to deal with them. So I'm sure he'll see it as the greatest on his end. But the worst part of it is Wijnaldum. You think there's only so many opportunities you get to play at a World Cup in your career, and this one's a very particular timing, coming in the middle of a season. You probably think, okay, I've just got to get like this next couple of months in, get used to my new club and play some games, and to lose that right away is pretty heartbreaking.
I mean, the pressure is so high on Roma right now because they have brought in such mega stars considering what they are as a club and who it is that they're trying to compete with. Obviously, the money of Juventus and Inter and Milan had won the title. And then you come in and you bring in the likes of Dybala and Wijnaldum and Matic, and everyone thinks, wow, you can challenge for top 4. You could even challenge for the Scudetto. And then to lose Gigi Wijnaldum, and they came out with shirts before their game against Cremonese yesterday that said Forza Gigi, which is, you know, like power to you. But I think it leaves them sort of with a few less options. And now they're considering whether or not they're going to have to dip back into the transfer market and cover this, which is just even more money being spent on what they thought they had enough depth now. As it turns out, they're getting and suffering a few more injuries than they would have hoped.
Because on top of that, last night, Nicola Zaniolo, who actually has also been linked with some Premier League clubs, he
including
dislocated
Chelsea.
his shoulder. So another loss for Roma.
At least a month.
Yeah, a strange one, that, because it didn't cross my mind that possibly that injury might decrease the chance of a transfer away, which would mean that you might lose him for a month but then get him for the rest of the season.
Nicky, Mina, thank you. Excellent as ever.